Now, what happens? Well, what we've seen is that the last really nasty recession we had was in the early 80s. And then what did we do? A lot of caffeine. 1991 recession occurred, and we had a little bit of flushing out of the malinvestments, but not too much. Then what did we do? A whole lot more caffeine. And then we got on a bubble, another artificial boom. What was the big boom in the 90s? The dot-com bubble. People said, hey, you got to put your money in the dot-coms. Why? Well, because the baby boomers were thinking, hey, I'm going to retire not too long from now. I better make some money because I've just been spending. I got to save up for this retirement thing. So everyone was putting their money into the dot-coms. It was fueled by the Fed pumping more of these guys into the economy. Also during this time, we had a couple of institutions change their policy. Maybe you've heard of them. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are government-sponsored enterprises. What did they do? They would buy mortgages. So you have someone like Ditech contract with you, get a mortgage through them, and then they would take that and sell it to Fannie or Freddie. They would pocket the money. Fannie or Freddie would hold on to the mortgage. Keep that in mind. The FDIC Bank Holding Company Act says that the capital asset ratio for these GSEs, these government-sponsored enterprises, they only needed to have 3% capital asset ratio. Banks need about 10%, so less than a third. Keep that in mind. So the dot-com bubble comes along and pops. And what did we do? Well, it's like the person falling asleep at 2 in the morning. What do? We take a whole lot more caffeine. We sort of nod off a little bit. We go through a very weak recession, but we don't really clear out many of the malinvestments. And where does the money start flowing after the dot-com bubble bursts? Into housing. Real estate. Why? Because we know housing prices never go down. Never do real estate things lose value. Now, there was some legislation that took place in all of this, one of which was the Community Reinvestment Act. And it said, banks, we know that you're looking at the credit worthiness of people, but we've changed the definition of the American dream. The American dream was, if you try hard, you work hard, you can build yourself a good life. What's the American dream now? Own your own home. How'd that happen? I don't know. So, they changed it on us. Now the American dream is to own your own home. So the Community Reinvestment Act encourages banks to make loans to people who cannot afford loans, mortgages, at these levels. People buy more house than they can afford, or a second house, or a vacation house, or a house that they're going to flip. We see that the subprime market emerges. Now, what's that? The subprime market is where people whose credit rating is lower than most people. They're getting mortgages with little down or nothing down. What these mortgage brokers would do is they would make the mortgages and then sell those mortgages to Fannie and Freddie. In 2006, about 20% of all housing was subprime. 81% of those subprime mortgages were securitized. And so what does that mean? That means that Fannie and Freddie were bundling them together and then selling them as an asset. So, when it comes to risk, we need to think about what we mean. Well, there's this thing called class risk, okay? So, let's assume we're looking at life insurance. I don't know how many people in here are going to get killed in a car accident, but I know if by looking at the statistics that a certain percentage of people will die from a car accident. That's a class risk. I don't know who in particular, but I know a certain percentage will. I don't know who's going to get cancer, but I know that a certain percentage of people are going to get cancer. So I can't point to any one specific person and say, aha, you're the person. But I know that a certain percentage of people will. Well, it's the same thing with mortgages. I know that a certain percentage of people are going to default on their mortgage, not pay it back. I don't know who, but I know that a certain percentage will. Now, if I bundle these things together, I'm diversifying. Oh, that's okay, right? Diversification is good. So I'm selling these diversified mortgage-backed securities. So Wall Street loved these things. And people said, well, they got drunk. Wall Street got drunk on these things. But I have to ask, who was supplying the alcohol? Who was supplying the party tools? Who was supplying the money for all of this to happen? Well, that's the Federal Reserve. You see, people are blaming this on greed. Ooh, it was greed. Greedy bankers, greedy Wall Street types caused all this. Well, my friend Johnny pointed out that blaming it on greed is like saying that gravity caused the airplane to crash. Right? Greed's a constant. Gravity's a constant. It's not going to be greed. So, fear checks greed. Right? The fear of not getting any money when you make an investment. That checks your greed. You say, too risky, I'm not going to do that. But when the government backs these things, and they said, well, Fannie and Freddie aren't officially backed by the government. Well, guess what? They bailed them out, so yeah, I guess they were. So what happened? Well, the government placated the fear. The government placated the fear. So what would happen to greed if there's no check to it? Of course people are going to get extra greed, sure. So in 2004, we see interest rates start to climb. In 2006, we see the yield curve invert. We know a recession is coming. So then what happens? Well, what happened last fall, last September, with the toxic assets and everything? What was that? Well, what happened was we have these mortgage-backed securities, and people start defaulting on their mortgages more than what we thought. How much more? We don't know. So what do you do when you look at something that you don't know the risk with? Do you go out and buy that? If you don't know the risk, are you going to buy it? No. Nobody buys these things. So what happens to the price, the market price, if nobody's buying them? Well, there is no price. So does that mean they have zero value? No, because people are still paying their mortgages. They're still paying a dividend, paying a yield to the owners of this. We just don't know how many people are defaulting. And so nobody's trading these mortgage-backed securities. Those are the toxic assets.